president of the round table right now.
Right.
So you'll see me up at the end there for the speaker gift. And all
I've
that.
seen you every time I've
Oh,
come.
good. Oh, good. Well, thanks for coming.
I don't know. We tested it earlier. Okay. Welcome. Welcome to the Central Pennsylvania World War II Roundtable here on August 1st, 2024. I'm a stand-in here tonight for our president, Vice President Jeff Patton. My name is Steph Chortnoff. I'm a local educator, and I'm on the board here, and I'm stepping into the limelight for just a few minutes, okay? Again, welcome and thank you for being here. A couple reminders. Please silence your cell phones at this time. Again, I want to thank you for attending this special event. That's you folks in person here, and we're also live streaming, and this will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. So please check it out, and please forward that and send that out. Help broadcast what we're trying to do here to honor World War II veterans and preserve and present their stories. At this time, could you please stand if you're able, and we will have the Pledge of Allegiance. United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'd like to start by recognizing any World War II veterans. If you could stand or raise your hand, World War II veterans. And of course, we thank their spouses and families. We'd also like to recognize any U.S. veteran or service members here in the room today. Any veterans or service members, thank you. Couple fundraisers. We are a nonprofit. We operate off of your goodwill and donations. We do have a helmet committee in the back of the room. Please share what you can to help our organization continue working. We are selling commemorative coffee mugs for $10 each, and of course you've seen the book sale outside. The book sale will pick up after the speaker is finished. You'll notice there are World War I, World War II, and Vietnam War era books available. Please purchase what you can. Please donate what you can. And cycle continues. All right, typically this is where Jeff talks about this day in World War II. Just going to highlight something that, how this escaped me, hit me on the head earlier. We're at the 110th anniversary of the start of World War I. So the First World War, 110 years ago, give or take a few days, depends who's counting, but we certainly wouldn't have World War II without World War I. Two events stuck out when we took a look at World War II events that happened today, August 1st, and that was Anne Frank made her final entry in her diary on August 1st, 1944. 1944, the Warsaw Uprising against the Nazi occupation began, and it was hard fought until it was crushed the first week of October. So that's today in World War II. A couple reminders about some upcoming related events and some related roundtables, and then we will get to introducing, we'll drop some information about our next speaker, and then we'll turn it over to our main speaker, who we're all much anticipating. September 14th and 15th, down at Carlisle at the Army Heritage and Education Center, will be the Army Expo. I was there several years ago, had a great experience. Please spread the word about that, and it's a great opportunity for people interested in the military and service members. That's September 14th and 15th. The following weekend, September 20th to 22nd, is the National Park Service is running a World War II weekend at the Eisenhower National Historic Site in Gettysburg. Would like to remind everybody we have some mutual friends and people who are interested in military history. We have our roundtable here that meets the first Thursday of the month. We also have a Central Pennsylvania Vietnam roundtable. It meets in Harrisburg. Any questions? Rich Burton is in the back, and Rich Burton has a stand and cards to recognize our Vietnam veterans. We also, in this area, have a Harrisburg and a separate Hershey Civil War roundtable, and some of their representatives and folks are here, including Steve Smith from the Harrisburg Civil War roundtable. Steve, are you out here? Okay. So again, like-minded individuals, please think about joining and participating in those events. Upcoming speakers. September 5th, we will have Mr. Sammy Steigman. He was a victim of the Holocaust as a child, and when he was liberated, he became a survivor. Now he is a motivational speaker, and through speaking at schools, organizations, and media outlets, as well as other places, he has a passion for his role and shares a fresh perspective on hope, life, and faith. So that's our September 5th speaker. October 3rd, we will have Mr. Ray Fermani. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Ray Fermani, thank you. He is a 8th Air Force B-17 pilot, and he is featured in a book by Mitchell Topol, and I believe they will both be in attendance October 3rd, and the book is called Against All Odds, the Ray Fermani Story. November 7th, another special event. We will, in collaboration with the Derry Township Historical Society, we will feature a projection, a documentary based on the life of Major Dick Winters of Easy Company of Band of Brothers fame. That will not be live streamed. I repeat, that will not be live streamed, and there's no recordings of this event due to some copywriting. But I did see it in the theater more than 10 years ago, and it's tremendous. So that is our October 7th event. Okay, I'd like to introduce Mr. Harry F. Miller. Mr. Harry Miller served in the United States military for 22 years. He had served from 1944 until his retirement in 1966. Mr. Miller was a member of the U.S. Army. Was a member of the U.S. Army and also served in the U.S. Air Force. And again, reading through his bio and speaking with him before tonight's sessions, I'm very impressed. And I'm excited to hear his story as he tells it. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. But again, Mr. Miller did his basic training in Fort Knox, Kentucky. He served and was stationed in the UK, Belgium. He was in France. He was in Germany. He was in Korea. He was also in Japan, the Philippines, Okinawa, and he goes on and on. The man has a wonderful life and a wonderful story, and we're excited to have Mr. Miller tell his World War II story today. Could we give him a round of applause, please?
I guess you can all hear me, I hope. I have a tendency to speak a little quietly for some reason. I guess it's because I'm half deaf myself. But thank you very much for having me here. I don't seldom talk to people in churches because, especially this kind of subject, because I have a nasty habit of calling the SS part of the German army for exactly what they were, and those words don't fit in a church. So if I slip, please excuse me, and I'll get going up here. I hope I'll get over here so I can get up here easier. And I hate to say this, but I'm blowing my nose continually because I've got what my dad used to call hay fever. And for some reason, it hits me about every other day here in Pennsylvania. I don't know why. But I sure wish I could stop it. So, not being used to starting off in a church, I just wanted to say welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you again for having me here. And I might ask you to pray for me after I'm done because I'm blowing my nose an awful lot. I started out as a kid in Columbus, Ohio, and I always wanted to be a soldier. I don't know why. Most kids wanted to be a fireman or a policeman or a cowboy. I always wanted to be a soldier. And the reason being is because we had a lot of parades for all the national holidays there in Columbus. And I'd always go to them. And we had members of a local army post there. They would march in the parade. And we had World War I veterans marching in the parade. And we even had some Civil War veterans marching in our parades when I was a kid. I think 1938 was the last one where the Civil War veterans were there. So anyway, a friend of mine in my neighborhood saw me one day and he says, I understand you wanted to go in the Army. I said, yeah, why? He said, well, I heard about a program that the Army started. He didn't know the name of it, but he said, why don't you go down and talk to the recruiter? And so I did. I went down and talked to him and asked him about it. He said, yeah, we're taking people. He said, but you have to have a birth certificate. So I said, well, how do I get that? He said, well, go down to your county courthouse there and, excuse me, and ask them for your birth certificate, and they'll give it to you. I said, all right. So I went down asking for my birth certificate. And in those days, they used to keep big books about like this. And somebody with a nice handwriting would write the information in it. They looked for me, could not find my birth certificate. And so I went back to the Army recruiter and I said, well, they don't have my birth certificate. Does that mean I won't be able to go? And he said, oh, no, I'll take you. He said, you are 17 and a half, aren't you? I said, oh, yeah. I guess I told my first lie in church. How's that? So anyway, they took me and went down. I think you wanted to know a little bit more about my youth. I think that was what you said, somebody. My youth was a strange one because the Great Depression was on. And they always used the wrong time about great. It wasn't great, it was horrible. And anybody that went through it will tell you the same thing. The problem was nobody had money in those days. Nobody ever thought that they would ever pull out of that doldrum that we were in. And I remember I used to I've read every magazine, newspaper that I could get a hold of. Always read a lot. I remember I fell in love with an ad about a military school somewhere in Virginia. And I used to show it to my dad, and he practically cried. He said, I wish I could send you there, but I just can't afford it. And of course, I know now he couldn't. And excuse me, but I'm blowing my nose a lot here. Anyway, I liked that, but I never got a chance to go to a military school. I was very bored in school most of the time because I don't know why. I just hated school. And it was something that I was sorry for later on. And I always tell kids, when I'm talking to any kids in a group, they ask me why I went in the Army at so young. I told them because I was stupid. Well, but I enjoyed it. I was never sorry, but everything turned out okay for me. It doesn't mean I'm any kind of a brain or anything like that, but I got into the right thing at the right time and got where I wanted to be. So I guess that If a person can look back at their life and say they're not sorry for anything that they had done as far as making a living, I think they're probably very happy, because I know I am. So anyway, like I say, I used to read a lot, and those were the days of the bad guys with the guns. Not the mafia, it was more east in New York. But we had guys like Babyface Nelson, and well, we had a batch of them. I can remember in my hometown, one man walked into a little bar, and it was just, the bar was not as big as a stage. He went in with a big overcoat on, he had a Thompson submachine gun inside his pocket, and he just walked in and sprayed the place down, turned around, walked out. Don't know how many people he left dead in there, but they never did catch him, at least that I knew of. We had several things like that. I was walking down the street one day, about a block away from where I lived, and there was a car that came by. It was what they called an old touring car, if you know what that was. It was an old Dodge four-seat convertible, four-door convertible. And I'm walking down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden this man that's walking toward me, he pulled me over to the building, and he got like here, and I'm right here, and he'd hold me like that. And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Did you see that man in the back seat of that touring car that went by?" I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Well, he's a bad man. I'm glad you didn't." And apparently what happened, he was some kind of a crook, bandit or something, and he was sitting in there, and he had a big overcoat on with a fedora hat pulled down, and of course they had no windows in those cars. And also, lived on the main drag right through my hometown, Route 40 is what it was. And you'd see cars come through, stop at a stoplight or something, and you look at the back end of the car and you see bullet holes all over. That's the kind of things that went on during the Depression. Fortunately, they never killed people that weren't friendly to them, or unfriendly, they turned against them or something. But they were sure bad actors. Well, one of the famous named ones was killed just outside of our town. I don't know whether it was Babyface Nelson or the other one, Machine Gun Kelly. Great names. I don't know whether any of you remember these people or not. But that's all history. And I read a lot, newspapers, magazines, and I remember that there was a submarine, an American submarine before the war, that was sunk and couldn't get back up. And they had to try out something new that somebody had invented called a diving bell. It came down and got on top of the submarine and opened the hatches and pulled the guys out. That was a great story at the time. And of course, we didn't even know what submarines were hardly, because we had never had anything to do with them. But that's the kind of stuff I read about. And I remember the Limburg baby that was kidnapped, and the German guy from World War I who came to this country, and he was the one that was responsible for kidnapping Lincoln's son. And the baby was found dead, by the way. And the policeman that led the investigation, name was Schwarzkopf. And if you remember the recent Desert Storm battle, he was the commanding general of that. It was his son. That name bothered me when I first saw it. And I asked around, and I finally found out that, yes, he was the son of this colonel of the New Jersey State Police who found the baby Lincoln, or Lindbergh. But anyway, that was the kind of stuff we went through. Hungry, we were always hungry. Well, very little money in the house. I can remember my dad would never go on what we call welfare now. In those days, they called it relief. And he would not go on it. He always said, "I helped bring these kids into the world, and I'm going to take care of them." Well, he took care of us, all right. We'd like to starve to death, but he took care of us. He did a good job, I think, and I was always proud of him. And that's something I'm always glad that I can say that about my father. So many people can't nowadays, and it's a shame. But anyway, what happened was one day, my brother, oldest brother, he walked into the house and put a generic can of corned beef on the middle of the kitchen table. And he sat it there and walked off. So when my dad came home, out looking for work, and he saw this can sitting in the middle of the table, and he had blue eyes, bluer than that rug. And he said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's something to eat." He says, "Where'd it come from?" I said, "My brother Ray brought it and set it there." "Where'd he get it?" "I don't know." He said, "Get it out of here." I said, "That's something to eat." He says, "Get it out of here. I don't want it." So I got it out of there, all right. I hid it because my sisters and I were going to eat it, and we did. And my oldest sister was kind of replaced my mother because my mother died when I was 3, and my dad died when I was 13. And so we scratched for a living for quite a while. So going into the Army was really a blessing to me because I didn't know people ate that good. I was living it up in the mess hall, just eating so much I couldn't believe food was so plentiful. Then they sent me overseas and they gave me a can back, and that's another story. But anyway, that was pretty much my childhood, and that's one reason I went into the Army when I did. And I would do it again, all things being equal. I wouldn't want to go in today for various reasons, because some things have happened to the armed forces that I don't know whether I could live with it or not. But anyway, that was me. So I went into the Army and I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for basic training as a tank crewman. And I was wanting to get on to a Sherman M4 Sherman tank. But the Army in Europe would start sending messages back, "Don't take any more tank crews or infantrymen because we don't think we're going to need them. The war's almost over." And well, they found out later on that it was not. But in between times, they were telling people, "Don't take more," and then they'd say, "Get more, we need more," and then back and forth continually. So what they did, they cut back on the basic training and didn't give us the full time that they normally gave you for basic training. But I got as far as training for all the vehicles and all the weapons we needed, and the only tank I got a chance to train on was the new, at that time, M24 light tank. And it was a beautiful tank. It was like driving a sports car compared to the Sherman. The Sherman, you had to handle it like it was a lumber wagon, and it acted about the same way. But that little M24, you got in there and it was like a race car. It was just beautiful. So anyway, I got my training, and when I was finished with my basic training, they sent me to Fort Ord, California, to the 788th Amphibious Tank Battalion. Amphibious. Me and water, we don't meet. We don't match at all. And I was unhappy about going into an amphibious unit. But anyway, I set my bag down, and they told me, "Okay, we'll go over here and get in line." There was 2 lines of 6 medics to give us shots on our arm as we walked through. They gave me shots of stuff I never heard of: elephantitis and sleeping sickness. Never heard of those things at that time, and some others I hadn't heard of. So anyway, I had a shot record from basic training about that long. Now I had another one with 12 more shots on it. We had to carry these silly things around with us. So anyway, after the shots, I went back to the same man, and he said, "Well, just leave your bag there. We're going to put up with you tonight, and tomorrow morning fall out for reveille, and I'll tell you where you're going." And I said, "Okay." So I went, got my cot, and opened it up, and slept there over the night. got up in the morning for reveille, said, all you men go down to the motor pool and they'll tell you what you're going to do. So we did so. We went down to the motor pool, and there was a gruff old first sergeant down there, and he told us what we're doing. He said, what you're going to do is you're going to take all of our LVTs, landing vehicle tracked. There's a picture of it on that board. You'll be able to see them later on. There was 4 models of it, and all it was a thing that would take you into a beach from the water. It's supposed to do about 30 miles an hour, but they must have tested it on a swimming pool or something, because I saw them going out in the Pacific and they were like this, and it looked to me like they're doing about 5 miles an hour. But thank God we were getting rid of them. We had to strap them on to flatbed railroad cars, and when we got them all ready to go, we took the train to Brooklyn Army Base, which is still there. And we went out, parked right next to the ship. And the ship brought their cranes over and picked them up and put them in the ships. And we took off. We landed at I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, Le Havre, France. And the reason Le Havre is because that's just above Normandy, several miles. The reason we landed there is because they had the only railroad tracks that came up right on the landing piers. So we got there, and they unloaded them on the French flat cars, and going through the town of Le Havre, which I never can say properly, it's Havre. How do you pronounce that in French? So anyway, as we were going through town, we were getting the finger from a lot of the French people, and even the whole arm, and they were cussing us out and everything. Whenever they'd say something nasty to us, they would say, well, then why didn't you go ahead and defeat the Germans so that we wouldn't have to come over and do it for you? And that shut them up. They've changed, by the way. Since then, they found out things were not like they thought they were. So anyway, we took the train with the flat cars to the town of Antwerp, Belgium. Now, the British had already captured the town of Antwerp, but they had not captured the port. And Eisenhower was on General Montgomery, the British general. Eisenhower was on his back continually. I want that port cleared so that we can bring all our supplies in through Antwerp instead of bringing them over the beaches. Oh yeah, I'll take care of it. We're going to do it. And then after that, Montgomery came to Eisenhower, asked him, he said, I want to do something fancy here. I want to go up through Holland and use the airborne to take out all the bridges, and everything's going to be nice. Well, you've all heard of Market Garden, I'm sure, and the bridge too far, so I don't have to tell you what that was, except that it was a fiasco. We lost a lot of people, and nothing was accomplished. So when he came back and apologized to Eisenhower, Eisenhower said, now I want that estuary opened up now. And the estuary was 82 miles long, and it fed into the Baltic Sea. So that's the reason we had taken those landing vehicle tracks over, because the British didn't have any, and they needed something to get across the estuary to run the Germans out. The Germans would let ships come in there, but if they did, then they'd start shooting them from the land on the north side of the estuary. And that's the reason they needed these landing craft to get across there. So at that point, we left, and we went back to Le Havre, to the cigarette camps. You all know what the cigarette camps are, I assume. If not, put your hand up, would you, so I know whether I have to go into it. Okay, I'll go into it. The cigarette camps were three tent camps. They were nothing but tents. And that's T-E-N-T-S, not T-E-N-S-E. Although there was a little tents there too. And anyway, we got there. We went to Camp Old Gold. It was nothing but a bunch of pyramidal tents, and you waited there until they found a place to send you. I was there about 4 days, I think, and they had a 6x6 truck pull up, and they picked up 4 or 5 of us and took us to our units, which my unit was the 740th Tank Battalion. Now, the 740th Tank Battalion, I'm stopping there so I can give you a history of the unit, because it had an interesting history. The 740th was formed in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And what they did, they took all of the draftees from one Army camp in Texas and one in Oklahoma, brought them together and brought them down to camp, to Fort Knox for basic training and to teach them what they should do as a medium tank battalion. They went through their training and did real well, got high marks in their artillery and everything, had great gunners. But the funny thing was, they decided, well, we think we got enough medium tank battalions right now, so let's make a special tank out of them. Let's go into the CDLs. CDLs, what's that? You probably have the same idea I do, chauffeur driver license. Actually, what it was Canal Defense Light. The Canal Defense Light is something the British thought of. And they came up with some weird stuff, I have to admit. They really did. Well, this one was about as weird as could be. They came up with the CDL tanks. What it was they took the turret off of either a Sherman or a Lee Grant before it. They took the turret off and put a round, it looked like the old cheese box. Remember the cheese boxes? They were round like this, completely round. They're about that deep. Well, these were a little higher than that. They did not have a gun on them, but on the turret they had 2 slits right in front. There's a picture of them on that board too. And they had these slits, and between the 2 slits, they had a high-powered light, very strong light, that flashed back to the rear of the turret into a concave mirror. That made it even brighter, and the lights went through these 2 slits in the front of the turret. And the purpose of that was so that, and there was an operator in there that could flip these lights so that it looked like, well, like some of you that were in the Navy or involved with the Navy, like a signalman used, they could send signals. Well, it was the same kind of thing. And the idea was the tanks attacked with the infantry across the desert, and the Germans wouldn't be able to see them because the light would be too bright. The Germans, being as smart as they are, they came out with the infrared gun sights. They could see right through the light, and they could still knock out our tanks. But the British liked it. They thought it worked fine. The trouble was, well, they sent our unit over to England, and they trained over there as a Canal Defense Light unit. And then they sent them to England, and they trained them as a Canal Defense Light unit. Then suddenly somebody, in their infinite wisdom in the Army, got the idea, hey, wait a minute, that ain't gonna work in France. France has buildings, trees, bushes, all kinds of things that those lights aren't gonna help them. So they said, well, let's change this unit back into a standard tank battalion. So they had to go back and train some more. And about that time, the invasion of Normandy occurred, so my unit missed it because they were busy retraining again. But they, like I say, they became the best gunners that you ever saw or heard of. They were fabulous gunners. They could hit anything. So anyway, since the invasion came up, why, our battalion commander, he got real antsy. He wanted to go over and fight. And so he tried to talk people into letting them go. And finally he found somebody and said, well, okay, I'll get you 2 LSTs and you can take your battalion over, but you leave your tanks here. You'll get new tanks when you get to France. Okay, fine. So he loaded us up, loaded the battalion up, took them to Utah Beach, got off the LSTs there, and ran into the beachmaster who they asked him, he said, well, where's our tanks? Where do we get our tanks? And the beachmaster says, tanks? I don't know anything about tanks. I'm in the Navy. So he said, well, the battalion commander said, well, what do you suggest we do? He said, well, why don't you send your executive officer up to 1st Army and ask them where they want you? And then you go ahead and take your troops on over to Paris and meet them on the east side of Paris. Good idea. So that's what he did. So we met the executive officer on the east side of Paris. He says, take all the troops and take them up to the town of Neufchâteau in Belgium. Now, Neufchâteau is about 15 miles probably from Liège, west of Liège. I'm sorry, east of Liège. And so anyway, that's where I picked up with them. I joined them at Neufchâteau. So still, they don't have tanks. Battalion commander reported in to General Hodges, commander of the 1st Army, as ordered. And he said, why are you here? Who sent you here? And I don't think we're going to need you. And so if we need you, we know where you are. We'll come and get you at Neufchâteau. Meanwhile, keep law and order in town, and we'll call you if and when we want you. So battalion commander said, well, can we borrow 2 tanks so we can keep up the training? I said, yeah, we can do that for you. So they went back to Neufchâteau, and we just kept law and order in town. Well, what happened, one of our guys was driving a Jeep around town after the curfew. Curfew came on early in Northern Europe, about 5, 6 o'clock, something like that. So this man's driving the Jeep around town there, and he sees this lady walking up the road. And he stops next to her, and he says, lady, you have to go home. The curfew's on. She says, no, I have to go to the hospital. And he says, no, you have to go home. And she says, I have to go to the hospital. And she opens up her coat, and of course, she's very pregnant. And so he said, hop in, babe. He took her to the hospital. And on the way, she asked him his name. And let's say it was Joe Blow. So he told her, and he dropped her off at the hospital, took off, didn't see her again. Fast forward about 40 years to 1990, we went over to Neufchâteau, our veterans from our unit, and we had a monument built there, beautiful monument. Got a picture of that on that board too. And while we were there, I was the master of ceremonies because I was the secretary for the reunion group. And so a lady stopped me, a Belgian woman. She stopped me and she said, is Mr. So-and-so here, Mr. Blow? I says, yeah, he's here somewhere. I'll get him for you if you want him. She said, yeah, if you would. So you stay right here and I'll go get him. So the town was feeding us after the ceremony, and I found him feeding himself, and I stopped and I said, hey, there's a lady out here that wants to see you. And he said, lady? I don't know any ladies. I said, well, I don't know what kind of women you chase around with, but there's one out there that wants to see you. And I said, and she's a Belgian lady. And he says, a Belgian lady? I don't know any Belgian women. And I said, well, she sure knows you. So he said, well, let's go. So I went out with him and introduced him to her. And she asked him if he remembered her. And he said, no, I don't remember you. She says, do you remember one night I was walking down the road and you picked me up and you took me to the hospital? I said, no, I don't remember that at all. She said, what had happened? And she says, by the way, this young man standing here, he's about 50 years old now. So She says, this is the boy that was born that night, and his name is Joe Blow Schmidt or something. And the poor guy, he couldn't figure that out at all. Couldn't remember a bit of it. So anyway, I stood there and listened to them both going on about what happened. And when she left, I went back with this guy to where he could eat again. And I told him, I said, you know something? He said, what? I said, you're the luckiest guy I've ever known. He said, why? I said, well, you're only one of the 2 guys that didn't bring your wives with you. And I said, can you imagine what kind of life you would have for the rest of your life if your wife knew that you had a baby over here named after you? And he said, I never thought of that. He said, I guess you're right. But anyway, that's just one story that happened. And, you know, it's funny. I get to thinking quite often. I very seldom ever think about the bad stuff. I always try to keep my eye open for the good stuff, the stuff that's laughable. But of course, we all needed something to laugh at as the war went on, because there's a hell of a, excuse me, here I go again. There's a lot of things that you just don't want to remember, and you kind of push them aside. I mean, if you're able to, and a lot of guys aren't able to do this, but I'll go into more of that a little later on. But anyway, I try to push away the bad and keep the funny and the good stuff. But this was one of the things I just thought I just would never forget that. So anyway, finally the war started. We woke up one morning, December 16th. We could see the artillery firing up out in the horizon. We could hear them, and we were wondering what was going on. Well, nobody knew anything right handy where we were. And so finally, the battalion commander was riding down the road in his Jeep, and Brigadier General, the Assistant Commanding General of the 30th Infantry Division, stopped him and said, don't you have a tank battalion here? He said, yes, sir, I have a tank battalion, but I don't have any tanks. And he says, well, you go down to this ordnance depot, and told him where it was, and you take anything you want. We thought, oh boy, we're going to get new tanks finally. And he says, then let me know when you're ready. So we went down, and he said, take your whole battalion down with you. So he knew something we didn't know. So we all got down there, and we had to take pieces off of junk and put it on something we could get together. We finally found 2 tanks that we could put together from parts off of beat-up warmongers that were all shot up and stolen from and everything else. No radios in them, no gun sights. So we put together 2 Sherman tanks. And then we found an M32 tank destroyer. A tank destroyer, if you don't know what a tank destroyer is, it's a tank without a roof on it. That's the best way to describe it. Why they ever came up with that, I'll never know, because going through a town, you know, people could throw things into your tank. But anyway, this was a tank destroyer, and it had a 90 millimeter gun on it, thank God. But the other tanks did have 75 millimeter guns. So anyway, they finally got a hold of us, and they said, are you ready to go? I said, well, we've only got 2 tanks and a tank destroyer, but we've got a few M8 armored cars and Jeeps and trucks. He said, well, take what you need and go down to the train station at Stoumont, Belgium. So we did. We went down and had these 3 vehicles. There was a big curve going into the road which went past the train station. Picture of that's on that board too. And in tanks, you always approach things slowly. You see pictures of it on even the newsreel pictures. You'll see these tanks just going like the devil down the road, an MP directing them. These guys are way behind lines because you never went that fast going into combat. If you did, you were dead before you got there. You go slow, and everybody in there, all 5 members of that crew are continually going like this, looking, making sure you're not walking into a tank destroyer somewhere or a pile of hay. And the pile of hay will have a tank underneath it. If you find a pile of hay, you fire a couple of machine gun rounds into the pile, and if the bullets ricochet off of it, you know they're not ricocheting off of hay. And that's the kind of thing. You're continually watching so that you don't walk into a trap or drive into a trap. So we got to the first tank. Our first tank came around the corner, and he saw the first German face to face. He fired and knocked him out. He started to reload, and the round got stuck in the breech of the gun. So he had hand signaled back to our tank. The second tank came up. He came around the corner, and he ran into the second German tank. And after that, the tank destroyer that was sitting backward, he got antsy, and he came forward, and he came around, ran into the third German tank, and he fired 3 rounds of 90 millimeter into that last tank and like to blew it apart. Great weapon, great weapon. Now what happened is we had just turned the first SS Panzer Division, Adolf Hitler, around, and they scooted back. And that meant that in the first half hour of combat, our unit had stopped the first SS Panzer Division, something they never expected. And from then on, all the news was about us and how we stopped the first SS Panzer Division. So we became heroes real quickly. And then the Germans decided to get back into the town of Stoumont. So they found another route in there. And when we found out where they were in the town of Stoumont from another direction. And there was a hospital on the top of a hill, right in the center of town. It was 2 stories and a basement. And the 30th Division had some troops stuck in that building that they were trying to keep warm, I think, and they got caught in there, and they couldn't get out. Every time they tried to get out of a room in this hospital into the hallway, this Panther tank, a German Panther tank, is sitting at the end of the building. He'd put a round down the hallway and change their mind for them. And so they were stuck there. They couldn't get out. So we had to try to knock out that Panther tank, and it was sitting so high that we would even put the front end of the tank up by building underneath the front of it so that we get the gun up high enough to knock out that tank. We never did, couldn't do it, so everybody was called from the battalion, and we built a corduroy road up that hill. You all know what a corduroy road is. If you don't, why, just look at your corduroy pants or whatever you have on that's corduroy, you got little bumps on it. And that's what you do. You lay a bunch of logs or anything you find into the mud, and that gives you traction to get up the hill. That's a corduroy road. So as we built this corduroy road, we worked on it all night. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, we were finished. And our tank went up right at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he fired and knocked that tank out. Right, had a beautiful view right sideways of it, and knocked it out. And the crew went running, and so we got up to the top of the hill, walked into the hospital, and we freed the 30th Infantry Division troops that were up there. They went back to their units, which is in the next town of L'Église, and we checked the building out. We went down in the basement, and sure enough, down there was something like 92 old folks and kids, little kids, being held there by a Catholic priest, and he had the job of keeping these people quiet all night. And there's the 1st SS Panzer unit sitting there. Now, the 1st SS Panzer Division, you probably heard of the Malmedy Massacre. They were the bad guys that were at Malmedy. They're the ones that got the Americans out in an open field and shot them down like dogs. So they were the ones that we were fighting. And they were a bunch of I almost said it, people. And they were SS, which SS to us, there was always a word or two in front of it. It was never just SS. It was a cuss word in front of it. And we hated them because of the Malmedy massacre. That word went around fast. And we were told, don't take SS prisoners, because that's the way they treat their prisoners. They catch you, you're going to be slaughtered. So it went around the entire command over there, and we followed it. So anyway, we freed these kids and the old folks, and from that time on, the Belgians taught all their little kids, I mean little kids, no bigger than this, walk up to you and they shake your hand and they say, thank you for my freedom. Thank you for my liberation. I'll tell you, I can't talk about it without still thinking about how that sounded. And it just gets to you because you'll never find it in this country, never ever. Never ever have I heard a kid here in this country say thank you for anything. But that's all right. We've never been invaded. Someday we will be, and it's going to be a different situation. I hope to God we learned something from World War II, but I'm afraid we haven't. So the war went on. The next town was L'Église, and the 1st SS Panzer Division was holding the town hostage, and they had a lot of equipment in there, but they ran out of fuel. And they didn't know what they were going to do, so they were just kind of confused, and they kept fighting until finally, at night, they all slipped out of town, and they left all their equipment there. They destroyed all of it so that it couldn't be used. But they left all their tanks, trucks, vehicles there in that town. Meanwhile, the way we got them was our battalion commander had set up all his assault gun tanks. An assault gun tank, in case you don't know what that is, a lot of people don't. It was a standard Sherman tank with a 105 howitzer main gun. All the others had 75 millimeter or 76 millimeter guns on them. Those we called the fighting tanks. Ours were the artillery tanks. And what the purpose of them was, if you're trying to take a village or a town, you try to take the town without having to hurt anybody. You ask them to surrender. If they say no, you bring up your assault guns and you set up, and then you start firing into the town until they get the idea that maybe it's better to surrender or die under the rubble. That's what we were used primarily for, was mobile artillery. And so anyway, we got all the Germans out of that town, and they headed back to Germany. And from then on, we cleaned out a bunch of little villages and towns, like St. Vith, if you've heard of it, and Trois Ponts, which is three bridges, in other words. And all these little towns, which you'll see on the map we have there too, right up to the Siegfried Line. The Siegfried Line, a lot of people think that the Siegfried Line was nothing more than what they called the dinosaur teeth sticking up out of the water, they were out of the ground. They were concrete, reinforced concrete blocks, and they were very hard to move. You couldn't move them because they were dug down in the dirt. So what we had to do, we either had to hit and knock each one out with an artillery shell to be able to cross in, or we get a bulldozer or a tank dozer, a tank with a bulldozer nose on it where he could scoop dirt, and then have him come in and he'd cover those teeth, so to speak, with dirt so we could drive right over the top of them. So we got in there. Now the Siegfried Line, that was just the beginning. That was not the battle at all. The battle in the Siegfried Line was you had bunkers kind of like this, 3 of them together. And each one of them had a gun inside. pointed at you. And now there was 3 more over here that were protecting these guys, and 3 more over here protecting them, and then 3 protecting them right on back for about 2 miles. So each one of these bunkers was something you had to knock out one way or the other. The infantry had to do a lot of it because it was so hard to get the tanks in close to them many times without being knocked out themselves. But they found all kinds of ways of doing it. We even used tank dovers to push dirt over the door in the back of the bunkers. So if they didn't want to come out, they could die inside because we pushed dirt there and they couldn't get out. And we could put hand grenades on the top where there's a heat pipe that came out of there for a stove, and you'd blow the stove up inside and kill a bunch of them too. But most of them found that they wanted to give up. They didn't want to die that way. So we finally got through these things. They were 2 to 3 miles deep getting through these things. Finally got through, and we were with the 82nd Airborne going through there. And they loved us, and we loved them because they were a great outfit. And when they were relieved and taken over, the 8th Division took over their place. 82nd Airborne told these guys, if you can see something you want to hit, just tell them, point to it, and they can knock it out, I guarantee you. So we were very well liked. We had a good reputation for our gunnery. So the next town that we went to was Durham, and Durham was on the river that was pronounced the same way. But, excuse me here, it was, good heavens, it was the R-O-E-R River. I get these mixed up. R-O-E-R and R-U-H-R. They're both pronounced the same way, at least if you're American. I imagine they can pronounce it a different way. But we called them the Ruhr River, both of them. Well, R-O-E-R was right at the town of Durham. And Durham was a big town. It was a large town right at the beginning of the Cologne Plain. Now, the Germans had blown the water on a dam upriver so that all the water would come floating down there, but they busted up the work so that you couldn't repair it. So we had a floodplain of about 2 miles wide. So for 2 weeks we sat there and did the old shoot and scoot, where you fire a few rounds and move over, and fire a few rounds and move in another direction, fire a few rounds. That went on with us and the Germans. And then the our Air Force came over and bombed the devil out of the town. So when we finally got across with a bridge, the town was flat. But there was one thing that I remember, again, something funny, I thought. There was a statue there of a German general from First World War. And he was standing there like this. He had his left arm down here, and he was pointing like this. Well, originally it was pointed so that he was pointing west to tell his troops, that's where the fight is, go west. Now, this thing had vibrated, by all the artillery and bombing that went on, the thing had vibrated completely around, and it was facing the opposite way. Now he's pointing east, which is the way we were going. And I thought, and I said to somebody, I said, some GI is going to say, I gotta knock that finger off that hand, because I know that they wouldn't put up with a finger sticking out like that. I forgot all about it. About 5-6 years ago, I guess, I was at the library down at the home where I live in D.C., and sure enough, there's a picture of it, and the picture's in there out there too. The picture's there, and now he's still got that left arm down here, but instead of this, that whole arm is gone. And there's another thing. We laugh about things like that, and now you think about it, it wasn't really funny. It was something cute, but it was we thought that was hilarious. We just couldn't get over it. But that shows you what happens in warfare. You get so serious and so, I guess, just plain mad. And it takes something really funny to make your attitude change. That's the reason I don't like to dwell on the bad part. And I'll go into that a little later, and I'll tell you why. So anyway, we were on the beginning of the Cologne Plain. The Cologne Plain is just a big flat area going right straight over to the Rhine River, and Cologne sits right on the Rhine. Beautiful big cathedral there. Well, when you go inside there and they play their organ, my God, the whole place just reverberates. It's beautiful. Anyway, the Germans were holding the town, and we bombed it continually. The British bombed it. We bombed it. The cathedral was right next to the train station. Why they built it there, I don't know. But the cathedral was there long before the train station came in. So the bombers tried to hit it without hurting the cathedral. And they did a pretty good job of it. They didn't do too much damage on the cathedral. So anyway, we took the south part of Cologne. The 3rd Armored Division was in the center, and they caught a Panther tank right at the doorway of this cathedral, and they knocked it out. And that's a beautiful picture too. Right at the door, this tank is sitting there burning. And another division was over on the north side. So when the thing quieted down, why they told us to pack up and go back up to the town of Aachen, Germany, A-A-C-H-E-N, Aachen. And that was one of the first towns that was taken by the American Army in Germany. And so we had to load up our track vehicles on the flat cars, railroad cars, and we drove all the wheeled vehicles down to the 7th Army area to go across the Siegfried Line again. And you know, that was a tough battle on the top one, and here we have to go through this sucker again at a different location. So this time we were supporting the 63rd Infantry Division across there. By the way, one of its members became very famous, and that was Tony Bennett, the singer of I Left My Heart in San Francisco. He was in the 63rd. And we never could get him interested in going to reunions. He just wanted to forget the war, which is also what I'm going to talk to you about later on. So we got across there, and the next town there was the town of Hamburg, H-O-M-B-U-R-G, like the Hamburg hat. And we took that town, and then they told us, okay, go back now to the Rhine River and go north on the Rhine River, go up to Bonn, B-O-N-N, which was the capital of the West Germany when it was split up, and cross there and go north. So we went that route, and we got up north just about right straight across the Rhine River from the Cologne Cathedral again. And that's when the Ruhr Pocket Battle started. That's when all these infantry units lined up practically and just made a big sweep like this and captured thousands and thousands of troops. And boy, I don't know where they put all the troops that we captured in there. And we ended up in Dusseldorf. And in fact, we were stationed at the Park Hotel in Dusseldorf, which is still there, except now it's called the Hilton Park Hotel. So at least we got a little money out of them. So anyway, we were there for 2 weeks, cleaning up, finally getting a shower, and cleaning up our equipment. And then we got the word to saddle up and get as fast as you can, get it up to the town of Blakida, which was a little tiny town right on the Elbe River, E-L-B-E, pronounced Elbe. And we crossed there after they built a bridge. General, what the heck was his name? Matthew Ridgway, famous name. Matthew Ridgway was out on the bridge Come on, get the bridge built. Let's go. We got to get done. Come on, get going. The engineers were ready to kill him. But they finally got the bridge built, and we went across with both the 8th Infantry Division and the 82nd Airborne again. And we went north, and we got to a town of Ludwigslust. And Ludwigslust was a fairly small town right on the river. And the next town over was Wobelin. And Wobelin had a concentration camp. And the 82nd Airborne took that camp, and they asked us to stop and help them knock down some fences. So we took a tank and just went down, knocked down, they were all these simple fences. They weren't very hard to knock down, but we'd drive our tanks there and knock them down. So anyway, the battalion commander got on the radio, and he said, "Where the hell are you guys? Get going and move up. Keep going. We got to help the British." What do we have to help the British for? They were all right. So we never did find out why until long after the war. But we found out finally that the reason they sent us up there was because they wanted to have a show of force to the Russians. Russians were coming in from the east. The British had come up from the south, and they wanted us to come up from this direction and join with the British to block the Russians from taking Denmark, which was to our rear. And that was the reason for it. And I told a lady about that from Denmark down at the World War II monument one day in D.C., and I told her that. She said she was from Denmark. I said, "Well, did you know that my unit helped keep the Russians away from you?" And she said, "No." And I told her about it. She said, "Well, thank you very much for saving my country." And I said, "That's a nice way to say it. Nobody's ever said that." Well, I appreciated that. So anyway, that's where the war ended. We ended the war in the town of Schwerin, and that's right on the Baltic. There's a big castle there. It's a beautiful castle. And we stayed there for about a week, I think. And then they gave us our areas to police for the occupation. So that ours was down south, just above the Frankfurt area, Frankfurt Mine, the Frankfurt Mine. That's the Frankfurt, the Rhine River and the Main River meet at Frankfurt. So anyway, we put our battalion headquarters in the town of Limburg, and then we just stretched our companies right across to Rudesheim, Germany, which is on the Rhine River. And that's where we stayed until June of 46, when they broke us up and sent people every which direction. When the war ended, everybody was anxious to go home, except me, really. And the only reason I wasn't anxious to go home because I was just 17 years old, and here I am in Germany and able to go to all places in Europe that I've never seen before. And I thought, I've got a beautiful idea here. I'm going to stay here and see as much as I can, which I did. Re-enlisted to stay there. And a lot of guys re-enlisted and stayed there. The ones that went home because they had families, probably, or a wife or kids that they had never seen. And a lot of these guys had problems when they got home because they couldn't forget the war. Well, it's funny, but I was talking to a man one day down at the World War II monument again in D.C., and he asked me, he said, "Did you ever have problems at night or talking about the war?" And I said, "No, I never did." He said, "Do you know why?" I said, "Well, I think I do." I said, "I stayed over, as a lot of guys did, and we'd get together at time, like at night when we had nothing else to do, and we would talk about, well, a funny thing happened, so-and-so. Oh, yeah, that reminds me. I remember this happening." And the other guy, "Yeah, that's right, I had that happen too." And we talked it out. Didn't realize what we were doing. We were calming ourselves down. And I told this man that. He says, "Well," he said, "that's interesting." He says, my name's Dr. So-and-so. I'm a psychiatrist. And I've been on a committee that has been trying to figure out how some soldiers had problems adapting after the war and some didn't. And I told him, I said, well, that was my theory. And he said, well, you did pretty close, because that's exactly what we came up with too. And so that's, like I was talking about before, the easy things, the funny things, the nice things, I try to remember them. I try like the devil not to remember the rest. For years I found that I would dream about, now I want to tell you, I've got to say this. Those goddamn concentration camps. How else do you call them? What do you call them? You can't imagine people being so damn rotten to other people. And that's exactly the way the Germans were. And it stuck with me. That really stuck with me. Because I'd wake up in the middle of the night, until about 5 or 6 years ago, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd smell dead bodies. And I'd smell the smells from the concentration camp. I'd wake up and I'd smell my armpits, and it wasn't there. How did that god-awful smell come into my bedroom? And I never could figure it out, but it used to drive me crazy. And as you can see, I still get emotional whenever I talk about the damn things. Mainly because, well, I hate to go into it because I'll probably break down again, but I went into the crematorium where the ovens were, where they killed the people. And I noticed the floor had square blocks for a floor in the crematorium. And they had a kind of a gray material in between the bricks. And I was wondering about what that was. Anyway, I went around in back of the ovens, and there was a pile of this gray stuff, and that was ashes from the bodies. And the fact that I had come in there, was walking across all those bricks, and I was walking on how many dead bodies was I walking on. And that stuck with me for a long time. And it's still there, but it's the damnedest thing you can't get rid of, and it drives you crazy. But thank God, that's really the only thing that ever really bothered me. And it's enough. And anyway, they wanted I believe you said you wanted me to cover the occupation. The occupation was a snap, really, except we had some nasty things to do. We were broken up and people sent to the winds when our unit broke up in June of 1946. I went to the 9th Infantry Division, which was down in Bad Tolz area down in Bavaria, and it was beautiful down there, just a great place. But one of the stupid things they had us doing, make work, Hitler had a secretary whose name slips me. Anyway, we were given orders to go up in the Bavarian Alps and see if we can find this guy. He said, okay, what's he look like? We don't know. I said, well, you got any pictures of him? No, we don't have any pictures of him. He said, do you want us to find him? Huh? Yeah. Okay. So we spent time up in the Bavarian Alps getting nice views of the place, you know, and seeing a lot of nice country up in the mountains. Of course, we never did find him, but I did notice about, probably 10, 12 years after the war, they finally found his body in Berlin when they had torn out some building or something, and there was his bones, and they knew what happened to him then, because he got caught by the Russians and was killed on the street. So anyway, I was still down there and at Bad Tolz, and I went home after. No, Bad Tolz, and then when the 9th Division broke up, they put me in what they called the constabulary, You probably never heard of the constabulary as far as Germany went, but the constabulary was formed just to police the Germans. So we, as constabulary, we were in charge of like the state police. And the MPs kept order in the towns, in the cities and towns. And what we did was we pulled raids on the German homes. If they had weapons, we took them. If they had Nazi memorabilia, we took that. And technically, we destroyed them. Technically. Most of them made it back to the States, except mine. And we had roadblocks and checked people's papers, make sure that they're are where they should be. And I stayed there until July of '48. And then I came back and re-enlisted. And supposed to go to, I wanted to go to Japan to get into the occupation in Japan to see how it was. So I was supposed to go to the 1st Cavalry Division in Japan. But when I got there, they had us seated in a room such as this. Somebody called out my name and they said, go see so-and-so in the back of the building. So I went to see him and he said, you're supposed to go to the 1st Cav, is that right? And I said, yeah, that's right. He said, well, how would you like to go to MacArthur's headquarters instead? And so I thought, I can eat food, I can sleep in a bed with sheets, and I'll take it. I couldn't get it out fast enough. And he said, okay, well, pack up your gear and get on the train, and here's your orders. And I went to Tokyo, checked in at MacArthur's headquarters, and glad to see you, and we'd like to make you a crew chief. I was in communications, by the way, by this time. And so they said, you're going to make you a crew chief. I thought, what the heck is a crew chief? I knew the Air Corps had them on airplanes, but I didn't know about a crew chief in the Army at that time. So they said, well, you're going to be in charge of the communications people that go ahead of MacArthur. When he goes someplace, you have to go ahead of him and set up in the communications so that he can talk to both Tokyo and the Pentagon. That's no problem. We can handle that. So they said, okay, enjoy your stay. And I went over to leave. And, by the way, here it comes. I came back and they said, you have to go take glider training. Glider training? And I thought, oh my God. I had a brother-in-law that was in gliders in 82nd Airborne during the war. And I used to kid him about volunteering to be in glider troops. And he said, no, I never volunteered. They put me in it. And I said, no, don't tell me that. I'd kid him something terrible. And lo and behold, I found out that you didn't have to volunteer. They volunteered you. And that's what happened. So we took the training, and the day we graduated, they said, by the way, the 11th Airborne was still there from World War II. They hadn't gone back home yet. They were just getting ready to leave when we showed up. And they were unhappy with us because they had to teach us about gliders. We had to take 3 rides in a glider to get our wings. I got my wings, and by golly, I wore them too. And even though they said, the Army has just declared them obsolete, you'll never have to go out on another glider. Thank God. There was an old saying about riding in gliders. It was an instant cure for a lifetime of constipation. And pretty true, pretty true. So anyway, the Korean War started July of 1950, and I got caught up in that, of course. So every time MacArthur would go over to Korea Korea, or anywhere else, we had to go ahead of them. And we went to, people asked me, well, where were you in Korea? I don't know. I can't tell you where it was. What do you mean you can't tell me? Well, the air bases at that time just had numbers. They didn't have a name like Haneda Air Base or something like that. They had numbers. And I can remember the number 49, but I don't know whether that was one of the numbers or not. But that's what they called, Air Base 49. So there's no way I can tell you where it was because I didn't have a map. and I never found out where it was located. So that's what we did, and as it happened, you know, MacArthur had a penchant about him to be able to make people mad, and that's what he did with Harry Truman. And Truman finally had enough of it, and he sent him home. I got a copy of the order sending him home, too, which I treasure. It was top secret, and then it's been declassified. So anyway, he and I went home about the same time. He went home in his airplane, and I went home cattle class on a boat, naturally. And that was that. And when I got back, they put me in the Army Security Agency, and I didn't like it, and I tried to go back to Korea, but they wouldn't let me go because of my security clearances. And so I said, well, if you don't let me go, I'm going to get out when my hitch is up. Yeah, well, we can't let you go, it's the law. So, okay. So when my hitch was up, I went home, re-enlisted, and I went into the Air Force recruiting office when I got back home. And I said, here I am, can you use me? They asked me what I did in the Army. I told them, we'll take you. And they gave me my rank. I was a tech sergeant at the time. And so I just changed from OD uniform to a blue uniform, and just went on doing the same thing I did in the Army. And I was in communications the whole time. Then I got involved in, I ended up in Strategic Air Command, and you heard, of course, of the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and you also heard about the Russians and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Got involved in that, went on 24-hour. Oh God, that was terrible. We really thought we were going into World War III when that happened. But we survived that part of it. And then they had me go over to Vietnam on several occasions for different missions. And they were classified missions. And the first one, we went over as a group of about 40 guys, I think. We went over to get a shopping list of what the South Vietnamese wanted for their militaries. So we got that, and we took it back and tried to get the stuff for them. And then the next time I went over, somebody got the idea of using B-52 bombers over there. So I had to go over and check on feasibility of that as far as communications went. And I had several other missions to go on over there. But I was never there long enough to get a ribbon or a medal for that area. Reason being, you had to be there 30 days in one time. Or if you were there less than 30 days, you didn't get the medal or the ribbon. So hell with it, I didn't want it anyway. It's just something else to fool with. So that's my story, and I hope I didn't bore you half to death. So if you have any... Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You want?
All right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate the round of applause for Mr. Miller. Very genuine, articulate, and enlightening storyteller, wouldn't you say? We're going to move on to the Q&A session at this time. If you have a question or something you would like to share related to today's conversation with Mr. Miller, please raise your hand. Our board president, Chris, will feature people over here, and I'll run the mic to people over here. Please speak clearly and directly into the microphone, and we may have to relay the question up front, okay?
Okay. Any questions?
Wait, just wait.
Here we go.
Just wait.
How old were you when you joined?
Yeah, you didn't tell me.
How old when I joined?
Yes,
I was 15.
that's what we thought. Are you 94 now?
I'm sorry?
Are you 94 now? How old are you?
96, how old?
96. No.
96. My math is bad. When you were in the tank, the Sherman, what was your job? What did you do in that tank?
Well, I went in as a replacement, of course. The guy that I replaced had gotten, I think it was meningitis, and they sent him back to England for medication, whatever they did to him for that. And I took his place. I was either loading the 105 or I was a bow gunner, either one. It depended on what they wanted that particular time. When the guy came back that I had replaced, he asked to get back on the crew because he had trained with them all the time before they got over there. So they said, do you mind if we take you off that crew and put you in communications? I said, no, I don't mind. I had a background in communications anyway, so I thought, yeah, that's fine with me. So from then on, I was in communications for the rest of my time.
But you had to learn all the positions. You had to learn all the positions.
Oh yeah,
when you trained.
yeah. Anybody on a tank has to know all the positions, because if somebody gets knocked off, you got to be able to replace them, or the tank is no good. Anybody else? There's one.
I might have missed it. Where are you originally from? City and state?
Where are you from?
I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio.
Okay. Sir, thank you for your remarkable stories. You had an amazing life, and certainly thank you for your service. I agree. I've always been kind of a guy who always tries to look at the funny things, and I think that helped me cope with a lot of things I went through in the Army. And one story I think you'll appreciate as a tanker, I was always in infantry units, and this young lady here we were dating when I first enlisted, and we're about to have our 30th anniversary. But the one thing you did was you swapped high school graduation rings. And so she had mine, and I had hers, and I wore it on my dog tags. And a few months, I was deployed, I was out in the field, and a few months earlier, she accidentally lost mine at McDonald's. She threw it out. And so I gave her a lot of grief about that. But then mine, I wore hers, and I woke up one morning out in the field, and I'm like, oh my God, where is it? I lost it. Well, it turned out I got ran over by a tank. I don't know how I lost my dog tags. I was coming back from the chow line or something, and it got chewed up. My platoon leader was yelling at me. He was really mad because I was holding him up, and I said, sir, I'm not leaving until we find it. I'd rather deal with you than deal with her. But I had a hard time hearing you talk about your issue with like the French children and how they said thank you. I was working in Baltimore a few years ago, and there was a young man there from Somalia. And he came up to me, like just out of the blue. And I mean, this was years, you know, I was in my early 40s, he was probably in his mid-teens. And he came up and he hugged me and he said, thank you, Mr. Chris, for everything you did for us. So there's a moment where you have, it doesn't matter what country you're in, you have a connection as humans. And, you know, it floored me, it scared me, because I'm like, okay, why is this guy hugging me? but it dawned on me how much it meant, you know, our service and that kind of thing for what we did. And it's just, it never ceases to amaze me. It's almost like you can go anywhere on planet Earth and find people who are thankful for what our generations have done. And yours, sir, did more than its fair share, and I thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Anyone else?
When you got through your service, did you come back to your family and find your brothers and sisters?
What?
When you got through, did you come back and find your brothers and sisters? But you stayed in for 22 years.
I stayed in for 22 years, and I would get back to see him once in a while. But of course, we separated quite a bit because of age difference, for one thing, and location differences. If I was close to him, I'd go see him. If I was not, I couldn't. But it was nice. I mean, I had a brother that was in the South Pacific for 3.5 years, and I got to see him when he came home. As a matter of fact, one time he and my brother-in-law and myself, who else? We were sitting at the kitchen table talking about different things that happened, and I can't remember now, but one of my brother-in-laws was a first lieutenant in the Air Force, and he flew bombers over Europe. And he asked my brother, who had been in the South Pacific for 3.5 years and had 10 years service, and he asked him a question, and my brother said something like no, and he said, oh no, he says, all right, you don't have to say no, sir, to me. And my brother said, I didn't say no, sir, to you. I don't say no, sir, to anybody. And boy, he was bitter. He had had enough. But I guess that South Pacific made a lot of people pretty disgusted with life, and I can see why, because they didn't have near the association with other people that we had. I mean, some of the natives on those islands were really very, very primitive, to say the least. But it's funny. I mean, you never know what funny things are going to happen. Oh, by the way, 90 days after I retired, I got a phone call from the draft board saying, you have to come down here and register for the draft right now. and I said, well, look, I just retired with 22 years service. They said, I can't help it. I'm going to call the police if you don't get down here. So I went down and I showed them all my discharges and everything. And the lady said, now are you going to sign up or not? And she put her hand on the telephone. And I said, give me the papers. So I had to carry around a retiree card, a reserve card, and a draft card. And every time I went somewhere, and I was a private investigator at the time, so I was getting transferred about every year. And so every time I moved, I had to tell the Albuquerque draft board where I was at. One day I was up in Denver, and I came home from work, and my wife had the news on for the evening news, and the man that took over the draft said that he had heard that there was inequities in the draft, and he wanted to hear about it. So I wrote him a letter and gave him my story, and I never heard a word from him, but about 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the draft board saying, you don't need to let us know where you are anymore. You don't have to carry the draft card. But I got to thinking, really, because I went in when I was 15, I wasn't old enough to sign up for the draft. And I stayed in, and the Korean War started. I was old enough then, but I was overseas already, so same thing happened with Vietnam. So I thought, well, I guess they weren't as crazy as I thought, but the idea was ridiculous, I thought. But that's what happens. You never know what's going to happen.
One more question here.
This may be a bit of a loaded question, but did you prefer your time in the Army or the Air Force?
Loaded question. Army or Air Force, do you prefer?
I'll tell you, I'll be very truthful with you. The Air Force is the best way to go. I'll tell you why. And everyone that's in the Army will admit this, I know. Sleeping on the ground and in rain, snow, sleet, and ice, it ain't no way to live. If you're in the Air Force, they generally have a pretty nice place for you to stay. Even overseas, they had in tents. They were better off in tents than we were on the ground. And after a while, you get mighty tired of being cold and wet and dirty and can't get a shower, and that's what happened to us. Now, today's Army, I don't know. I don't know anything about today. But when I was in, we were lucky to get a shower. And we got pretty ripe, especially when we were in the tanks, because it's very close in, and you get knowing each other pretty well. Too well. But I'll be very truthful. I enjoyed my stay in the Air Force much more than I did the Army. But I wasn't there for good times, I mean, but I did find the Air Force better treatment. I found that the officers were much different in the Air Force than they were in the Army. I worked for several generals, and it was never Sergeant Miller with them. It was always Harry. And in the Army, it was never first name. And that kind of made it like a brotherhood rather than working for them or being a peon, you know. It was just a different life, and I enjoyed it. Everybody does not. I love the kid people that were in the Marines. I mean, you know, Marines have always been the target for anybody in the Army. And it's funny, some of the things that happen. But there where I live, for instance, every time something goes wrong with, oh, well, some Marine must have done it, you know. And it's funny, you get into things like that. I was talking to a kid there at the World War II monument one day. I think he was a corporal in the Marines. And I told him these kind of things that we blame on the Marines. Anything that's not screwed up, it's a surprise because the Marines screw up everything. Anyway, he laughed, and I said, I probably shouldn't be telling you things like that. And I said, I'm sure you haven't heard them before. He said, oh, yes, I have. He says, they're worse than people that are not in the Marines. They talk even worse about us in the Marines. So I thought, well, you poor devil, you're there. You're stuck with it. I went one time to a Marine recruiting office in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I had some time to fool around, so I knew this guy pretty well. And I stopped in one day, and he's got a big plaque on his wall. It says Super Marine Recruiter, and the number of people he had recruited. I said, what are you doing with that thing on your wall? He said, well, these kids come in here and they want to go in the Air Force. And I tell them I have to give them an intelligence test, and they don't pass it. And so they feel bad because they wanted to go in the Air Force. And I always tell them, well, why don't you get out and see the Marines? They'll probably take you. And that's how the Marines were getting their quota, and they gave him the plaque because he sending everybody down to him. So I've told a retired Marine pilot that I met at the Boeing Museum one day. I told him about that. And he said, oh, yeah, sure. He says, we want people we don't want smart people. We said, we want people that just do what they're told to do when we tell them to do it. I said, you mean you'd rather have a bunch of people around that have to be told everything? That use no initiative at all? He says, that's what we'd rather have. I said, well, okay, I'm glad I'm not in the Marines. I have a lot of fun with it, though. Generally, I'm kidding with them. Not always, but sometimes. That's just the way it goes.
Did they ever figure out your true age when you retired?
Did they figure out your age? Tell them how you figured they...
Well, yeah, no, nobody ever figured it out. The way I got it fixed, though, one time when I re-enlisted, they were filling out the paperwork, and I looked at it from standing over in front of the guy that was typing it. I said, oh, wait a minute, you made a mistake there. He says, where at? I said, you got there, I was born in 1926. I said, I was born in 28. Oh, I'm sorry. He erased it and fixed it. never had another word. That's what I'm talking about. I feel I'm lucky as a devil. I mean, not only living all these years, but doing pretty good. I thought I've been pretty happy with life. And that's just another thing I got away with. That again, you had to lie to do it, but what the hell? He doesn't know about it, and I don't normally tell anybody about that unless they ask.
All right, I want to thank everybody for the very good questions, and thank Mr. Miller for the great answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Very good.
Just want to introduce our board president, Dr. Chris Huffman over here. He has a few things to share with us.
Hi, everyone. I want to present the speaker gift here first, and then I want to have a few remarks at the end. I'll try to be somewhat brief, but let me present the gifts real quick. Harry, we have a coffee mug for you. You can be seated if you want. So,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. Hope you get some use out of it.
Appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Linda, thanks for coming as well.
Thank you, folks. I sure enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you very much. So I want to say a few words of thanks to Harry and also Linda up front. Thanks so much for coming tonight. And Harry, we really appreciated your story. That's so amazing. 3 wars of service, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all those 20-some years of service during a very eventful time for U.S. history. And the passionate way you talked tonight was so wonderful, and also the way you brought in your sense of humor. We really enjoyed that. I know for soldiers and sailors and airmen who served over the different wars, I think sometimes humor probably saved you guys and girls and women to get through some of the toughest times. Keep that sense of humor, keep that sense of humanity, and I think that really did help a lot of people at the time during these different conflicts people have been through. And we really learned a lot, too, with all these different terms tonight that Harry shared with us. And, of course, he explained everything and the weapons and different things they used and the different kind of vehicles and everything. Steph already announced our upcoming speakers, but just, Sammy Steigman will be your next one here, a Holocaust survivor in September. And please come up and at the end here and say hi to Harry and Linda. But also, if you'd be so kind, our helmet committee's in the back on your way out. We would appreciate any donation that you feel in your heart you'd like to give us, and we would appreciate that. Other than that, we'll see you guys next time. I really appreciate your attention and for being with us. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you.